Hello, everybody. Quirky Guy here with some Out of the Park Baseball 23. So, for those of you who don't know what this game is, it's basically you take control over a MLB franchise and you get to do pretty much everything that a actual general manager would do with it. So, before we get into all of the nitty-gritty of what the team looks like, we're going to talk a little bit about game settings. One of the nice things about Out of the Park is that it's an extremely customizable game for you can kind of do whatever you want with it. If you want to just be a manager and play the games as sort of a cheaper version of MLB The Show, you can do that. But what I think most people play this game for and enjoy this game for is the ability to go onto Twitter and tell the actual GM of your favorite franchise that you could do better, and here's the proof. But how we're going to go into the game is a couple changes from the default settings. First of all, I changed the overall rating scales and potential rating scales from the default of star ratings to the overall values, just because all of the other ratings in the game are on this 20 to 80 standard baseball scale. For non-baseball folks, if you're wondering why the scale is 20 to 80 instead of, I don't know, 0 to 100, I don't know. That's just what baseball's always done and will probably always do because baseball hates change. But we decided to do that. One other thing I would highly recommend for any new players of Out of the Park 23 to change in every single one of your games is do an autosave once a month. The default is once a year, but just as we all know, computers can crash sometimes, things can happen. Just having more autosaves is better. Once a month is a pretty good balance between security and waiting for an autosave every single day, because the autosave does take a little bit of time. Going into players, one of the things that I don't love for Out of the Park default settings is that it starts out with the player personality ratings are there and functional, but they don't show them by default. So this is something that I always change. Just put it on the profile page. Just get rid of the couple steps to have to go look for it for every player when you're trying to make sure that your team has its captain, has good team chemistry. Just getting less clicks is useful here. Batter aging speed, I turned down slightly. Just from my experiences with previous versions of the game, players age a little bit quicker than I would like. So I think this is what we're going to try for this sim anyway. Hopefully we don't have players playing into their mid-40s, but I think this should be good. Talent change randomness is one of the things that's really nice about Out of the Park, is that it's not like Madden or other sports games where a player kind of is what they are and you can just see what they are. But there's the scouting stuff, and you just have what your scouts take on a player is, and that changes, and development's so much more important in baseball than any other professional sport, that you see just these kind of random jumps in players all the time. And I think that the 100 average is slightly less than I would like, but also I just think the talent change randomness and having those crazy stories is just one of the most fun things that can happen in baseball, so I turn it up slightly. Over here, the trading difficulty has been bumped up 3 notches from the neutral and slightly towards favor prospects, just because I think that is a little bit more accurate. Leaving on that middle ground, you can have some pretty crazy stuff. So I have it set here. The player eval settings I forget exactly what the default is, but basically I increased the value weight on stats slightly. Let's make sure that those have been adjusted. And then we go into league settings. For the rules, I got rid of the expanded initial rosters. There's no lockout that Out of the Park 23 is based on, so there just doesn't seem to be a need for that for me, so I ended up getting rid of that. I also allow trading of injured players, just allows for trades to be more interesting, I think. and it's something that people can do in real life as well, so I think it makes sense to enable it here. One of the nice things that the game does is it does have evolution of the game. There's all sorts of different things here that are available to be changed, whether that's team relocation, shout out to the Miami Horned Frogs from the team nickname change that happened to me once of the Miami Marlins turning into that. The only thing that I turn off here is the DH rule, just because playing without the DH just is not something that I want to do. I think baseball's much better having the DH rule in existence. I also updated these because Out of the Park does not have licensing rights for all of the names, so some of them start out with slightly different things, but you can just come in here and rename them, make it easier. In the player settings, really the only thing that I've changed is I've just kind of set a lot of these to more of them than the defaults, just because, again, same logic here as with the talent change randomness settings of just how many studs that there are in MLB today that are from this international free agent system. To me, it just feels more reasonable that there would be more of them available to make it more likely that you have that type of thing. Now, one of the interesting things about the stats system in this game is that you can set it to be your leagues to be based on whatever you want it to be. Of if you want to play with kind of some of the steroid numbers, if you want to play with the inflated ball from the last couple of years, you can do that. I'm curious about what's going to happen with the current settings, just because we have the deflated ball, and I'm very curious about whether Out of the Park implemented that, because it was a fairly well-known thing that was going to be happening coming into this year, but I don't think anybody was expecting just how dramatic of a change actually happened. So I'm sort of curious to see what ends up actually happening here. But as you could tell from the initial team home screen, I'm going to be playing as the Minnesota Twins. I am a big Twins fan in real life. I think they're in a pretty interesting spot, especially kind of with the Correa contract, of whether or not they're going to compete this year. I think it's going to set up a lot for the team. I think if they do compete, then they can continue to push in that direction. There's a farm system that you can trade from to get more players. Or if they struggle this year and Correa opts out, then there's other veterans you can move and just turn this into a full rebuild. So I think that this team's just in a really interesting spot. So then going into the front office is the first thing that I have made some changes from the Twins in real life. All of these, from the hitting coach down, are all new. And that's mostly based on Out of the Park stuff. Of their original hitting coach just wasn't great at teaching hitting or handling development. Having these are important, where you need somebody who's good at that. Wes Johnson, again, is outstanding at pitching, so I kept him, which I'm glad, because I did try to keep the staff intact kind of where I could. You'll notice I didn't make any changes up here. You could definitely argue that I should be looking to get rid of Thad Levine, but assistant GM just doesn't really matter in this game if you are playing as a GM and are taking control of a lot of things, like I am, so that's not something that's really going to play a factor, so I just decided to leave him. The first base and third base coach are mostly for these things, just to, again, help with development. Scouting director, the one thing that's really important for any new player to Out of the Park is scouting preference highly favors tools is what you should always be running. A highly favor ability scout will tell you who is good. A highly favored tool scout will tell you who has the potential to be a superstar. So it's a much more higher risk, higher reward scouting preference, but scouting ability is something that you should be able to do on your own with stats and with other things that ultimately just, that's going to get you more regulars, but you want to find superstars. So that is why you'd want a highly favored tool scout. Team trainer, this is the most important thing, is preventing arm injuries being legendary. because if you are a baseball fan at all, you know that the way to tank a season is for your starting pitching to get hurt more than normal, and this is the best way to prevent it. Is you always want a scout or a trainer that is good at preventing arm injuries. You'll still get them, but doing what you can to minimize that is important. Now let's go into the actual team. Starting with the lineups, there's an interesting question right off the top here between Ryan Jeffers versus Gary Sanchez as to who your starting catcher should be. I think they're both pretty valid choices. They're pretty similar players offensively. Obviously, Sanchez is more home run power, has the fly ball hitter profile versus the normal batted ball profile of Jeffers, means you're going to get more home runs out of Sanchez. But I think that overall the profiles are pretty similar as hitters. So to me, the reason why I have made the change from what the default Twins have as Sanchez as their starter to Jeffers as my starting catcher. Admittedly, Sanchez is playing every 3 games, playing some at DH. He's still going to play a decent amount. Is, I think, twofold. Is number one is the catcher ability, while it's not as important as in previous games. This is a massive difference here in going from a below average catcher to an above average catcher is going to help with the pitching staff. But the other part is longevity on the team. I think that playing kind of for a worst case outcome, Jeffers is probably the catcher on this team for the next couple of years regardless, because he still isn't even arbitration eligible. He's around for 4 or 5 years, whereas Sanchez is $8 million right now. And you probably don't want to be paying what he's going to cost. Like, I don't want to pay him $10.5 million a year for the next 3 years for a catcher that really is only a hitter and is a problem in the clubhouse. Even though he hasn't really been in real life, I think that this is just... I'm not going to want to keep him around, whereas I want Jeffers around. So I think investing the time into Jeffers, who is a pretty much the same player now, I just think is smarter overall. Miguel Sano, I mean, him and Sanchez, basically the same player. Except now it's at first base instead of catcher. This team option is not going to get exercised. The Twins have way too many other first base prospects that are going to probably be more useful than him, while much cheaper than that $14 million option. He's gone at the end of this year. Hopefully he hits a bunch of home runs for us and is adequate defensively. But he's gone after the year. Luis Arraez is the type of player that the Twins just don't have very many of. Kind of one of the trends you'll notice in all these guys. Lower contact, higher home run power. Whereas Arraez is very much the opposite. High contact, high avoid Ks, good discipline, no home run power. This is the type of player that I wish the Twins had 1 or maybe 2 more of, in terms of just guys that you can count on to get on base regularly, get base hits, and not just be super home run reliant. He's still at a pretty reasonable salary. This is going to jump, and we'll have to make some decisions here in terms of if we struggle, we might end up moving Arraez. I don't really want to, but it's definitely something to consider, considering that he is primary position, second base. Can't really play him anywhere else, maybe first base. But then you compare him to Jorge Polanco, who's a much better defensive second baseman and is just a very, very good hitter as well that actually has home run power. He's one of the best second basemen in the league and is on a pretty reasonable contract. There's definitely a chance where if Arraez has a good year this year that he could be earning more in arbitration than this $7.5 million I'd be paying Polanco to be better. So that's part of the reasons why there are the questions with Arraez. But this is a really good contract. This is the centerpiece of a rebuilding team for sure, and is one of the best players on a contending team as well. Gio Urshela is a captain, which is really nice. Very good defensive third baseman. Hitting is obviously the question, where if you come down here and you look at these stats, compare the OPS plus from 2019 and 2020 of being a 30% better than league average hitter in those 2 years versus a below average league hitter in 2021. Whether we get this Urshela or this Urshela definitely will depend on whether or not we want to keep him around. 9.5 million's not unpayable. It's not impossible, but more than likely, I think we're moving on unless he really hits. Shortstop, I mean, Correa's a stud. Quite possibly the best shortstop in out of the park. The hitting's not like incredible, but it's obviously, I mean, all of these are above average, 50 being the average stat. And he's just very, very good. He'll probably opt out of this contract. Whether or not we look to extend him is definitely going to be a question, because the Twins' #1 prospect is also a shortstop in Royce Lewis. Lewis could play other places if we keep Correa around. This will definitely be an interesting question. Nick Gordon, it's a little unfortunate that he only has second base and shortstop position ratings. Much more useful in real life with having the ability to play throughout everywhere in the outfield. Unfortunately, this 50 range isn't going to cut it for a center fielder. Out of the park, he really wants 60 at a bare minimum to play there, but he can play left and right. He can probably play an adequate enough third base here as well. The arm's not perfect, but it'll do. He's a good utility player. Kirilloff is good. He can definitely play left field, right field, first base. He's probably the most likely candidate to take over for Sano after the year, just because the Twins have a bunch of other corner outfielders that are options moving forward. So you could take Kirilloff out of the outfield where he's like okay, he's not great, and move him to first base where, again, not great, but that just doesn't really matter at first base, whereas it matters a lot more in the outfield. Buxton's great, amazing defensively, good hitter. The contract is interesting in Out of the Park, of you don't seem to have all of the incentives. It'll be curious to see exactly how this works as we get to these seasons. But if this is just we're paying him $15 million a year, like the base salary is real life, as opposed to the 10-15 million additional incentives, I mean, this is going to be a steal for longer than it's just going to be a steal in real life. Kyle Garlick is up here for the exact reason he's playing for the Twins in real life. He's here to mash lefties. One of the nice things that you can see is you can see that there are these differences between lefties versus righties. And when you're looking at potential platoon players, taking a look at these is really useful. When we look between him and Max Kepler, you can see that there's this big difference. If he hits righties really well, all of the numbers are better against righties than they are against lefties. And Garlick, same, just the inverse of that. You have something similar with Kirilloff as well, where he's worse against lefties than he is against righties. So you play Garlick versus lefties, and then versus righties, you play Kirilloff and Kepler. Kepler's another person who's in a pretty interesting spot of this contract is good. It's also tradable, and as much as my wife will hate me for saying that Max Kepler is someone that I will be very heavily considering trading in the offseason, it's definitely something that I have to be thinking about. He's incredible defensively, especially in right field. But again, the Twins have the corner outfielders that are in AAA, in AA, that make him potentially expendable for less money. If he hits really well like he did in 2019, then we keep him around. If the bat doesn't play super well, then I don't know that the defense is worth paying him the $8 million plus next year. So, kind of just looking at the general lineups, Arise is just such a good leadoff guy, especially against righties. Buxton, Correa, Polanco, Kepler up here against rights. He hits them well. Urshela, Kirilloff, Sano, Jeffers. Versus lefties, it's not a ton different. Ariz is moved down because he's not as good hitting lefties, and Buxton smashes them. And Kyle Garlick again is in here to hit lefties. Moving over to the pitching staff, there's a lot more questions here. This is definitely a team where the lineup is much better. And while I don't want to do trades for the first month-ish, if I was, this is where I'd be looking to make improvements. The top three of the rotation are good. Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, Chris Paddock are all good. They're all under contract for at least one more year. This $12 million team option is probably going to be a steal for Sonny Gray. Joe Ryan's not even into arbitration yet. Chris Paddock, our estimate of only 2.6 for next year. Really good. Still under the main reason why the Twins were willing to trade Taylor Rogers was for Chris Paddock, and hopefully we don't have him have to get Tommy John like he did in real life. 4 and 5 are definitely spots where we'll be looking to make upgrades at the trade deadline. If the team is doing well, I will probably try to get Frankie Montas, is something that I think that a lot of people wish the Twins would do in real life. So I will probably be trying to make that happen if we're doing well. Bailey Ober. So the extreme fly ball and low movement is something that the Twins have a lot of in this game. And target field does suppress home runs to a certain extent, which means that it's maybe not as big of a problem as it would be in smaller parks, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Of if the home run levels go up for Bailey Ober, like the stuff just isn't there to justify him being a big starter if we do have that. And while Bundy doesn't have the fly ball tendency, again, that low movement, Bundy's also gone after the year. There's pretty much no way that I can see myself picking up that $11 million team option with the arms that we have in AAA. Going into the bullpen, this is one change where I don't like to use commissioner mode, which is a tool that's available for you to go in and change pretty much anything. I changed this. If you've watched Duran throw in real life, he sits at casual 100 miles an hour. It's the highest average, one of the highest average fastball velocities in the league. I changed this to be 100 plus because that's what he throws in real life. So I think that it's reasonable to make that change. The bullpen after that is a lot of questions. Duffy and Thielbar are both decent. I would prefer to have better, I think both of these are good middle relievers, but I don't love them as setup guys. Alcala is sort of, again, kind of in that I could swap him and Duffy and kind of be saying kind of the same thing of, again, I think they're kind of just better than average middle relievers. Kind of same with Pagan. Joe Smith, again, same thing. Cotton is more of a long relief type guy that can also be a middle reliever. Coulomb is mostly here to just be the other lefty arm because Thielbar's my later inning lefty. And Chris Archer is, I just think, not as good as as Bundy and as Ober. So I have him as the long guy. He would be the first one to go into the rotation if something were to happen. But for now, he's just kind of the long reliever because I don't really want to run a 6-man rotation. I just don't think that the reward is worth it here. But this bullpen really only has one guy that I like in the end of games. So this is something where at the deadline, I'll probably be trying to pick up a reliever or two, and probably even before that as well. Because this is where I think that the team has the most potential upgrades. The last thing to look at is player development and our farm system. This is purely based on top 100 prospects, which the Twins don't really have any higher end ones, but there's a lot of guys that are kind of in that. You can see here 8 top 200 prospects. A couple of these guys are probably just outside the top 200. So I think this is a pretty decent farm system overall. We've talked about Duran, we've talked about Ryan. Josh Winder is someone who I don't. This is kind of pre what he's shown in real life to I think be better than this, but he's still 85th best prospect in baseball. But again, there's that fly ball concern. But I think this is the guy who can be the first call up of if there are injuries or there are struggles, that he can probably be a guy that gets called up to do that, to kind of take the place of Archer, who would move into the rotation. Royce Lewis is blocked at shortstop for right now, but he's a captain, is probably the number one prospect actually for the Twins, even though he's not ranked as the right now and out of the park. So right now I have him playing second base. I just want to basically do with him what the Twins are doing with him in real life, which is get him work all around the diamond for the first couple months of the year, get these position ratings up to the point where he's not going to kill us in the majors, and then call him up to more or less be Nick Gordon, except better and with a lot more potential. Manuel Rodriguez is unfortunately probably not a center fielder in this game. The 55 outfield range is backup center fielder once a week, once a month. But him being corners definitely hurts the viability, but there's enough time for him to develop. He's only 19. Even if he hits all of these, he's a major league piece for down the road. Austin Martin, it's hard to see what to do with this. Not super fast. The range really isn't there to play shortstop. Outfield range isn't really there to be your everyday center fielder. The bat's iffy. Like, he's a guy who should walk a lot. I mean, you see the on-base percentages are crazy. He had the highest on-base percentage in AA in 2021. But it's Austin Martin, I probably am going to look to trade. I'm guessing his value is going to be higher on the trade market than I think it is to the Twins. Cantorino is just another good, possibly relief arm, possibly starter. 45 stamina's not like great for a long-term starter, but there's potential for this to be either a 4th, 5th starter or a reliever. Balazovic, I wish Out of the Park would stop doing him dirty, because he is the Twins' best pitching prospect in real life. I have tried to make him be good in the last 2 or 3 versions of the game, and he just never turns out for me. I want that to change. He's going to get a chance to be a starter for me, and just hope that he develops well. I mean, you can see a lot of these ERAs over the last 3 to 4 years are all really good. He's a very good pitcher. Hopefully that works out. Andrade, I think that would be how you pronounce it, Danny De Andrade, is the Twins' main signing from last year from international free agents. I mean, if he develops, this is a really, really good player. He could actually be a shortstop. He's probably better at second base long term than shortstop, but he could definitely play shortstop. And if Royce doesn't develop, this would be the guy who would take over there. Jose Miranda is not like actually a right fielder, but these ratings are okay enough to the point where he starts out in the majors on the 28 man, but I think he's kind of blocked at the moment. So I think just kind of trying to find places to get him playing time in AAA at some other positions, to have some more options. Because, I mean, this is a really good bat. I wish that the discipline would go up a little bit more, but, I mean, this bat will play for sure at the major league level. Ernie Enriquez was the other piece of the Mitch Garver trade from this offseason, where they got Kiner Falefa to basically just flip, and then also picked up Enriquez. So this is a guy who's kind of, to me, will always be the like main talent change randomness like star in my mind, because in my Out of the Park 21 save, he turned into the best pitcher in baseball. He had 80 stuff, 80 movement, like 70 control. It was absolutely absurd. He was getting like 14 strikeouts per 9. He's not going to be that, but I think there's potential here for either a starter or a kind of similar to Cantorino, this high velocity guy coming out of the pen who can maybe get you a couple of innings. One of the things that you can do is you can take a kind of a look at how they are starter versus reliever. See how that stuff jumped potentially up to that 55, whereas it's only a 45 rating as a starter. I think it's more likely he ends up as a reliever for me, but he's definitely a piece that I'm going to try to keep as a starter. Simeon Woods Richardson was the other piece of the Barrios deal along with Austin Martin. And he's the guy who I think could be a starter, except for this control. This controls potentially is a really big problem. If this can get up to maybe 40, then he's a starter. If not, he's probably just a reliever, which means the value could end up being a little bit worse than you would hope. And then there's just kind of some more guys down here. There's nobody super interesting. Other than Hyuna Kavoko was a draft pick of the Twins a couple years ago, hasn't really developed super well. But if he develops here, I mean, this is a bat that could play for sure. That 65 infield arm is super important for third base. Which kind of shows that like this is a guy who could definitely play third base if the bat develops. But that is the team. There's a couple of ways this could go. Of either we get off to a good start and we just kind of try to take over the division like the Twins have been doing up to this point in real life, or we could struggle. Maybe it's injuries, maybe it's just players not producing, and we end up kind of fire sailing at the deadline of trading Correa, trading Kepler, and hoping to trade Sano. I doubt he has a ton of trade value. But yeah, I hope you guys are excited to go on this journey with the Minnesota Twins like I am. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.